want to just draw your attention to some interesting, relevant psychological and other literature on the question of whether happiness, now not in the behavioral understanding, formal behavioral understanding of economists, but in a more thick and substantive sense, which they often do also appeal to, of satisfaction. Whether satisfaction or happiness is promoted by possessive individualism. And I think here one can draw, for instance, on the very interesting work by Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi. If there are any Hungarians out there, please don't criticize my pronunciation too much. But Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, who is one of those who's been writing, I think, very persuasively that actually I'd be very interested to hear later about your personal experiences in this regard. But the thing about the idea that what actually promotes well-being and happiness is not possessing things, and this may not be a surprise to you, but doing challenging and difficult things, and gaining in the skill or capability of doing those things through pursuing the challenge of doing them. That acquisition of mastery over difficult things gives people fulfillment. And certainly this comports also with the finding in cross-country studies on self-reported satisfaction, insofar as you believe them, and there are many reasons to be concerned about them, of course, that people in rich countries do not typically report a higher level of self-reported satisfaction than people in poorer countries, even if within societies richer people do report a higher level of satisfaction than poorer people. Part of the reason richer people report a higher level of satisfaction than poorer people within societies may not have to do with the fact that they have more things, more goodies, as Muscular, Winston, and Green emphasizes to be important, but rather with the fact that they have more control over their lives. Because one of the things that one also finds in studies, for instance, on anxiety, mental health, and indeed even physical health, is that people who work in bureaucracies or otherwise have very low level of, at lower levels, or otherwise have very low levels of control over their day-to-day existence, suffer a great deal of stress related to that. And people who have more autonomy and more ability to structure their own lives enjoy fulfillment which comes from that. And perhaps that type of finding, I was just referring now to something called the Whitehall study, which is a study of health and well-being in Britain, that broadly comports with the kind of worldview which Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi is advancing in through his psychological research, that finds that what he calls flow, the sense of fulfillment which comes from doing things and doing hard things, is actually much more crucial for well-being than what people have or don't have. And of course there are other studies that belong more to the domain of economics proper. Way back in the 1950s, there was some discussion of this, and then in the 1970s, people like Fred Hirsch and Tibor Skytowski talked about it. Skytowski perhaps more. I've cited on your reading list his book, The Joyless Economy, which made some distinctions in this regard, and pointed out that the acquisition of things appears to lead to transient satisfaction, increase in satisfaction at most, and then to plateau. There's also, I think, interesting essay by Ashish Nandi called The Idea of Happiness, which I also recommend to you on the reading list, which goes into a more perhaps one could say psychoanalytically infused approach to the problem, and argues very roughly that the pursuit of happiness without unhappiness in life is actually a kind of neurotic disorder, and that the only realistic option is to have a life with the normal quantity of unhappiness. That is realistic and worthy of people, and a possible way in which they can be fulfilled, to have a life which moderates the degree of unhappiness. But to abolish unhappiness is like abolishing death and disease. It's something that one cannot ultimately entirely do, and perhaps ought not relentlessly to try to do.